Our last section of the axial skeleton is the thoracic cage. So we've already gone through the skull and the vertebral column, and now we're at the thoracic cage, which includes the sternum and the ribs. So the sternum is right here. It's the most anterior part of your chest. The sternum can be broken down into three individual parts. The first is the manubrium, which is the most superior part. The second is the body, which is the majority of the sternum. And the third is the xiphoid process. So remember, process means a small projection. So right here you see the xiphoid process is the small projection at the end or most inferior part of the sternum. The second part of the thoracic cage are your ribs. So here we see all the ribs, and you'll notice that you actually have 12 pairs of ribs. We can break down those 12 pair of ribs into true ribs and false ribs. So the first 7 pairs of ribs are true ribs. So that's here, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are called true ribs because they directly connect to the sternum. For example, follow the 7th rib, and here's the bone, the actual rib, connected to the hyaline cartilage, and follow that all the way up to the sternum. So again, the true ribs directly connect to the sternum. The next ribs are the false ribs. The ribs number 8 through 12. So if you take a look at these, that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So these false ribs don't connect directly to the sternum. They connect to other hyaline cartilage, which then connects to the sternum. And in fact, if you look at the 11th and 12th pairs, they don't even connect to the sternum at all via hyaline cartilage. So we call them floating ribs because they just end here and not connected to anything else. Now, like I said, you can see here the hyaline cartilage in blue. Remember, hyaline cartilage is really tough, so if you even feel your rib, you can't even tell where the actual rib bones stop and where the hyaline cartilage began. This hyaline cartilage is specifically called costal cartilage. Anytime you see the word costal, that's referring to the ribs. Now, if you take a look at each individual rib, you'll actually notice these 3 features on it, and this is where it attaches to the vertebrae in the back. Turns out that each rib will connect to your thoracic vertebrae. And this is important because remember how many thoracic vertebrae you have? 12. And you also have, note, 12 ribs. So each rib is going to connect to a thoracic vertebrae. So in the rib, you'll have the head, which is what makes contact with the vertebrae, the neck, which is right below the head, and a tubercle. A tubercle is a small bump or projection. And so right here you have the tubercle. So let's go back to our bone list and take a look at the section, the thoracic cage. So we've covered the sternum with its 3 parts, the manubrium, body, and xiphoid process. We looked at the ribs. You have 12 pairs of ribs. You have true ribs, which are the first 7 pairs of ribs. Then you have the false ribs, which are the last 5 pairs of ribs. And of the false ribs, 2 of them are floating ribs, pairs number 11 and 12. And then we covered that all ribs have the head, neck, and tubercle, and we also took a look at the costal cartilage. Now I've moved back up to the vertebral column because I wanted to point out one feature here in the thoracic vertebrae that we didn't talk about. Remember the thoracic vertebrae, with the 12 of them, they'll connect each to the 12 ribs. So the transverse costal facet, you'll find at the very end of the transverse process on these vertebrae, and is exactly where the head and neck of the ribs will articulate or come into contact with the vertebrae. So again, this is the flat area at the end of the processes that connect to each rib on either side.